Hi everyone and welcome to my review of The Artist in 2011, and it's directed by Michel Hazanavicius. Now, here is the Blu-ray. That's the first watch tonight. I've really been looking forward to seeing this for many, many years. At the time, I wanted to see it. I don't know why. I didn't see it. I don't know why I didn't pick it up sooner. Since then I've watched even more silent films. And actually being able to, of course, actually buy like a Blu-ray set, for example, of Chaplin. Watch most of his films, which I did last year. He is now in my top 5 directors of all time. So now more than ever, I am obsessed with silent films. Silent cinema, for me, really is quite a few of them films are some of the almost the pinnacle, of cinema for me. I think City Lights, in particular, almost the pinnacle without spoiling anything. Yeah, but basically, yes. This film, of course, it came out in 2011, and basically, yeah, it won quite a few Oscars. I believe it got 5. It was nominated for 10, including, of course, it got Best Actor for Jean Dujardin, who played George Valentine in the film. Of course, he's the protagonist, and it got a couple of other Oscars, including Best Picture. Now, whenever a film gets Best Picture at the Oscars, there's usually it becomes a divisive film mostly. There's very rare exceptions really. In cinema where a film is not in some way hated on, you could say, and called overrated. I don't really like to use the term overrated too much, because that's kind of like saying it shouldn't be this. People shouldn't feel this about it. I like to say I don't quite feel as strongly. But this film, I was massively looking forward to it. And it's of course an ode to silent cinema, and of course this basically it's kind of like Singing in the Rain, but not it's actually not really got sound in it. It has got a couple of moments where there is sound in it, but mainly this is a silent film. It's more like Modern Times, for example, where there is some sound segments, there's some singing and stuff, but it mainly is a silent film. And yeah, it kind of, like Singing in the Rain, it kind of comments on the transition from silent to sound cinema, which is fascinating, of course, and that transition, is very, very interesting time in Hollywood, especially, and but just in cinema in general. But the Japanese were very late in transitioning, but it mainly happened late 20s, of course, early 30s, where things started to change. But there was a lot of issues, of course, with sound films, and of course people like Chaplin were very, very hesitant, and rightfully so. This film basically explores that, and of course different views on it. George Valentine is the main protagonist, and of course you've got Peppy Miller. She is his love interest in the film, and she basically adapts, you could say, to sound, and basically she becomes a rising star, and very, very successful. And basically George, played by Jean Dujardin, George basically is very, very hesitant. He doesn't want to transition to sound. He's quite happy making, as he calls it, great films still, and he kind of laughs at the idea. John Goodman is in the film, and he's kind of in charge of things. He shows him at first, very early on, this kind of idea of sound films, and George basically laughs at this, and he tries to carry on making silent films. Not successful, and very, very quickly he starts to have this is his downfall, you could say. And he was a great popular star in the silent era in this film, and then he starts to lose it really, basically, and the film basically becomes very, very dark and really, really moving tale. And this film, of course, it's been called overrated, and I thought from what I'd seen, the pictures and everything, it looked like I could love it. Of course Blu-ray as well, so it only enhances it. And it just looked really, really like I could love this film. I love silent films, and it's very, very acclaimed critically. It's a lot of lists of best films of the century, and for me personally, I don't personally feel it's overrated. It's one of the best films I've ever seen, and I think it's an absolute masterpiece. My third favourite film of 2011, probably, just behind The Tree of Life, and definitely has part 2. And yeah, I think it is really a perfect film. I absolutely adored this film. I think I just felt like clapping at the end. It was everything I wanted and more. You know, it was a wonderful, you know, kind of callback to silent cinema, and really as well, you know, the visuals in this film kind of made it feel like you're actually just watching, you know, a classic silent film. Maybe about some of the interference, you know, in the picture and stuff, but it looked absolutely wonderful. You know, it just really, it reminded me, you know, of a Chaplin film, the way it's shot, and just wonderful cinematography. Some of the best of the century for me. It's absolutely wonderful. Now, of course, you know, this was very, very big because, of course, really the first silent film, or one of the first for many, many years, and you know, it's a black and white film, of course, as well. It's a callback, and you know, not everyone, unfortunately, you know, for me, you know, not like everyone will actually, you know, want to ever watch this film. You know, less and less people, unfortunately, are watching silent films. I love silent films, and you know, I prefer classic cinema in general. But this film, really just is wonderful to see. You know, straight away wonderful to see because it's kind of you never really see this happening now, and it's kind of wonderful for a callback, you know, to classic cinema. The purity of silent films is key, and it's perfectly portrayed here. You know, this is just an experience. You know, I've not had in a while. You know, and you know, it's not the best silent film or anything like that. It has a lot of competition, but it's definitely one of the best I've seen. Actually, it could be in my top 10 silent films. It's that good. I think. You know, the cinematography, it's just perfect. The way this film, you know, the camera movements and everything, absolutely wonderful. Has a real sweeping feel, you know, and it opens with, you know, a very, very big scene, you know, kind of flamboyant scene as a spectacle from the very beginning. And, you know, as the film goes on and on, it becomes more and more kind of dark and low key, you could say, and kind of and just more and more emotional. So it kind of portrays everything it wants to, and you know, as the film goes on, it becomes more and more dark and atmospheric. Very, very dark film. You know, it's kind of a masterful character study in the end. It's a wonderful romance. You know, of course, Bérénice Bejo, who played Pepe, she was wonderful in the film. You know, and this romance is just so wonderful. It's so uplifting and very, very moving. The two characters of George and Pepe, you know, they're kind of individually great characters who kind of have different views, but they, of course, they love each other, and basically, you know, they kind of get separated across a lot of the film because of their, you know, their kind of choices. You know, she wants to kind of pursue, you know, the sound pictures, and George, of course, is kind of not wanting to adapt, and it's wonderful that it kind of has these two different views, but doesn't, you know, preach to kind of say what one's better, you could say, and that's great because, you know, of course, a lot of the time it wasn't a great, you know, not a lot of filmmakers made great choices, you could say, and straight away jumping into sound in a lot of the narratives, because the first couple of years of the sound films were not, you know, were a big step down for me from what I've seen, you know, of silent films. The very end of the silent period, wow, it's remarkable, and obviously a lot of the stuff was lost in that transition. But yes, you know, because really, City Lights is the best film, you know, at least for almost a decade, and that was, you know, silent film. It easily trumps, you know, anything really in the 30s for me. And yeah, of course, it kind of presents this kind of argument, but it's not heavy-handed. It's wonderfully done, and you know, it's a wonderful kind of ode to silent cinema, this film, but it's just so personal as well. It's not just a callback to it. It's not just trying to do that. This is something, you know, that's just completely unique, and the genius ways in which, you know, it kind of comments and explores the transition. It does it for comedy, but it's also, you know, very, very sad, a tragic film at times. That's what really gets me. You know, how this character, you know, of George becomes more and more kind of isolated, you know, just kind of desperate and kind of unhinged because he doesn't want to, you know, adapt, kind of thing. And you know, he kind of just really cares about you know, the art of silent films. You know, and it's just wonderful to see, and very, very moving. These characters, you know, in the film are just so wonderful. You know, they're not, you know, they're not stereotypes or anything. They are really wonderful characters. The script, you know, the titles, intertitles and everything. It's just wonderful. I think as well, when there is sound, sequences in the film, they're wonderful. I think it's just really lovely to see. What they do here. And of course, it's very very surreal and kind of disturbing dream sequence. With George, that was great as well. And at that point, I thought, is the film going to be completely sound off this or something? But of course not, because I never really look into spoilers really. This film, I didn't know anything about it other than just seeing some pictures, hearing the acclaim, and it was just, yeah, you may call it kind of linear and stuff. I don't really care about it too much, but it's actually quite unexpected. It takes a lot of different turns that I didn't expect, and it's just an amazing film. How this is crafted. As I say, the cinematography is just absolutely perfect. The lighting, just the camera movements, the framing, it is absolutely perfect. This film looks so wonderful. The visuals, it's just so good. And of course, the acting, it's just across the board, is perfect for me. You've even got John Goodman, Malcolm McDowell makes a little small appearance. Give one of the best performances in one of his films in his career of all time. And he's a great actor, not being in too much, but it was nice to see him. And yeah, I think the acting across the board is just perfect. And the more and more this film went on, the more emotional it got. I think it was such an emotional film. It had so much kind of depth. These characters, really really subtle stuff at times as well. And I just got so invested, in particular in the character of George, in his journey across the film. Of course, he's got his dog as well. I love the way that that's done. Wonderful little uplifting stuff, moving, kind of friendship there, and it's just his struggle, with the kind of silence of sound, is so perfectly done. It's just masterful. This film, an absolute masterpiece. The score, and of course. Actually, they use some existing music. They actually use in a extended sequence, quite daring this, to use the Vertigo, some of the Vertigo music by Bernard Herrmann. They use it near the end of the film for about a 5-minute sequence, but it's actually perfectly used, and that is rare to see that. Very bold to use that music, because of course, Vertigo, one of the best films. The score is kind of, I just always think of that film, and I thought, it would never be kind of used in a good way, in a unique way. It was here, and it's perfectly, the mood of that scene in the sequence perfectly fits the music. And yes, the ending as well, lovely ending, very very uplifting, and I think this really deserved the awards that it got. I don't think it's quite the best film of the year, 2011. It's not. It's my third favourite though. So that is quite a feat. There's a lot of great films coming out that year. I think I prefer this to Drive, which is an absolute masterpiece. This film, I connected to it a bit more actually. I think this film moved me so much. It's such a creative film. Even though, of course, it's a very much an ode to classic cinema. And kind of specifically, covering, this transition, but it is so creative in the way it's executed. It's got a simplicity to it as well, which is great. And the kind of, you could say that the tone of this, the kind of joyous nature, is perfectly captured. Of silent films. It's very very kind of upbeat and everything, and and then. Certainly after about the half an hour mark, it starts to get a lot darker, and really, really goes to some dark places. Very surprising stuff, and Jean Dujardin gives an absolutely mesmerising performance. I think one of the best of the century, maybe actually for me. Wow, this performance is masterful. It really was something else, and this character, he's just so great. He's very early on, of course. He kind of, really similar to someone like Clark Gable, a classic actor. He's got this charm, the smoothness, the kind of confidence and everything. It's just so good. Perfect casting here, and it's just a wonderful performance. but then he, the emotion, that he portrays in the second half of the film. Oh, it's just a powerhouse performance. He rightfully got the Oscar, really, and you know what a performance. He's been called overrated. This performance, I don't see it personally. Absolutely masterful. The rest of the cast, just absolutely wonderful. And this film was just everything I wanted, and more. I think it's definitely one of the best of the century I've seen. My third favourite of that year, and this film, it really is flawless for me. It's so good, in terms of cinematography, editing. You would think that this was made, back then. Just the way that kind of the feel of it, the visuals, they very much look like classic films the way they're shot, and that's just perfect. The editing, the kind of overlapping. It's just wonderful. The fades and everything, and the kind of the way that people they act in the film. It's kind of this jovious kind of way at first, but it really it's such a masterpiece. This what it kind of kind of explores here in such a powerful way. The romance, it really is flawless. The longing that they feel. And they come into contact with each other throughout the rest different parts in the film, but they're kind of separated because of their views, and it's just such a well-crafted romance. The performances are perfect for me. I don't think there's anyone bad in this film, and it's got such a heart to the film. It's just wonderful. It really is a wonderful pure film, capturing the pure cinematics, all this kind of stuff of the silent era and classic cinema in general. Really, I cannot praise this film higher. I think it is easily a full mark film for me. It's just absolutely wonderful from start to finish. And the visuals, absolutely mind blowing. The characters, the narrative is flawless, and it's just such a creative film. The score is wonderful, very overwhelming at times. Even the existing music they use in the film. The film is directed to perfection. I think this film is easily full marks, and it actually manages to just get into my 100% plus tiers. And basically, it's not a tier 1, it's not tier 2, but it is 100% plus. Tier 3. Now that is very, very high praise for me. Went into my top 200 films. Probably at the moment it could be in my top 10 silent films. Of course there's more I need to see, but it's just absolutely wonderful how it kind of it gives a wonderful callback in a sincere way. This could have been pretentious, but it wasn't. It could have been unoriginal, but it wasn't. It was such a human film, so creative. So much thought and care has gone into this, and it's a shame that there's not more films still getting made like this. I'd like to see a lot more silent films getting made. Still, and this is just a wonderful film. Rightfully so. Massive critical acclaim, and definitely not an overrated film for me. I think it is one of the best. Certainly of the 2010s performances. Wow. Especially Jean Dujardin, he gives a masterful performance, absolutely mind blowing. I love the romance. I love what it kind of how interesting it is. How compelling it is, and what it says about the transition, how that's kind of portrayed. The characters, the narrative. It's also perfect, and visually it's just absolutely mesmerising. The score, all this kind of stuff. This really is a wonderful piece of work, and it really was everything I hoped for and more. I think this is a masterpiece. It's just it's wonderful, and I can't wait to watch it again. Actually, I thought there's a chance that I could love this, and it didn't disappoint. It really probably exceeded my expectations, and just an absolutely wonderful film, and warm, sincere, and masterfully crafted. So yes, highly recommend this. If you've not seen it, and it's really perfect for me. I absolutely love it. And yes, thanks for watching my review of The Artist.